responsible diplomacy based upon autonomy, pragmatism, and peace. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Ahn Cheol Soo, the presidential candidate of the People's Party. I am grateful to the president of the Seoul Foreign Correspondents Club, Mr. Kim Moo-sun, for his kind invitation to share my vision on diplomacy and foreign policy. I also thank all the distinguished members of the media in this room for joining us today. Today, I'd like to brief you on my diplomatic stance that I will assume should I win the upcoming presidential election in March. I sincerely hope your coverage on my foreign policy statement will help augment friendly nations' interest in me and understanding of where I stand. As you may be well aware, the world is fast changing. Perhaps, where you are in right now, Seoul, is at the center of such a world. In the midst of US-China hegemonic competition over advanced technology, Korea must make a clear decision and choice. As the competition heightens, Korea's decision time is also correspondingly coming fast. Russia's pending threats to invade Ukraine is reviving the Cold War-like confrontation. Should China be affected by the situation and employ force on Taiwan, that would invite US intervention, which will give a rise to a serious challenge to Korea. Should North Korea resume its nuclear tests and keep firing ICBMs, we must find a clear and effective countermeasure along with the international community. All the scenarios mentioned above deeply concern Korea's economy, security, sustainability toward a future society, and the peaceful management of the Korean peninsula in a stable fashion. For this reason, the next government of Korea must build swiftly a responsible diplomatic foundation based on unimpassioned and critical assessment surrounding Korea. A bold approach and strategy is often required, while maximizing the national interest, yet in some cases embracing the notion of minimizing loss as alternative. We can no longer afford to remain ambiguous in diplomacy on our values and principles, unlike the current administration. We may be able to stand on a tightrope for now, but not for a lifelong time. The foundation I envision for Korea's diplomacy is responsible diplomacy based on autonomy, pragmatism, and peace. While protecting the nation's autonomy and people's dignity based upon the national interest-first approach, I also yearn AG-10 Korea to be more proactively contributing to the world peace and development in a much greater responsible fashion. This is the diplomatic foundation whereby Korea will become a responsible state to the Korean people, as well as to the international community. To this end, 5 principles will be in place: national interest first, respect the democratic values, respect the international norms and mechanisms, reciprocity, and mutual benefits and equality. From this perspective, I will elaborate on where I stand on Korea's relations with neighboring states including the United States, inter-Korean relations, and science and technology diplomacy. I will begin with our relationships with the neighboring states including the US. First, I will fully implement the May 2020 US-Korea Summit Joint Statement. By doing so, we can demonstrate that there is a continuity, consistency, and sustainability in our policy towards the United States, thereby giving rise to a fast recovery of the confidence and trust between the two nations. We can improve our security situation by contributing to the peace and security of the Indo-Pacific regions as emphasized in the joint statement. We can also enhance our cooperation in the areas of science and technologies, and Korea can secure an original source for technologies and their final byproduct markets in the United States. The ROK-US alliance is the very foundation of Korea's security policy. The foundation must remain unwavering. Only such a foundation will allow us to be flexible and resilient with our response. By fully embracing the commitments laid out in the ROK-US joint statement, Korea will be deservingly so recognized as a responsible state and can more effectively secure its national interests. Second, I will pursue a principled diplomacy to recover Korea-China relations. Moon Jae-in's government failed to establish the principles and approaches that should have called for China's respect for our sovereignty. As a result, the government's failure invited China's undue interference in the deployment of THAAD to Korea and subsequent economic sanctions against it. It also allowed China at its own discretion, without our permission, to enter into our waters and aerial areas. China's military intrusions have not been met by proper measures to date, unfortunately. I will immediately renounce Moon's government's so-called three no's offerings to China. They are unreasonable and damaging to Korea's dignity and autonomy. I will institutionalize a so-called red line against China and effectively respond to China's military provocations based on the principles I have set forth above. It will enable both Korea and China to develop a forward-looking partnership based on equality and mutual benefit. 3. I will restore our relationship with Japan based on the spirit of Kim Dae-jung statement. I will keep preventing the territorial disputes and history issues from being politicized and make the Korea-Japan relationship forward-moving. I will shun away from such political leaderships that intended to exploit international relations for domestic political purposes. Narrow and politically manipulated leadership is in direct contradiction with the will of the people of both Korea and Japan who yearn the relationship of both countries to move forward. I will be persistent with my demand for a sincere remorse from the part of Japan. However, I will also take a two-track approach to facilitate the development of our relationship with Japan. That is, to take a separate approach between history issues and the ones on future cooperation, and not let one interfere with the other. Based on these policies and principles, Korea will be able to contribute to the stability in Northeast Asia. It will also be able to garner positive supports from the international community as one of the core states in the world through implementing independent, pragmatic, and peaceful diplomacy. I envision in the end that Korea will rise to the status as a rulemaker and no longer a norm taker by collaborating with the world as a responsible state. I will now present my vision on the inter-Korean relations policy. My vision and goals for the Korean Peninsula peace is to realize a Korean peninsula without a war and nuclear weapons, and the two Koreas living together. To meet this end, I will embrace our brotherly sentiments with sincerity when carrying out talks with the North. However, as to its military provocations, including the resumption of nuclear tests and missile test firings, I will counter them with principles, in calmness and toughness, and in line with the international community. Global cooperative network diplomacy is vital in deterring military provocations in the Korean Peninsula. I will defend Korea's security and peace, the people's lives and safety against such provocations in collaboration with the international community, and not shy away from resorting to military countermeasures. That is the end state of a responsible state that I envision. My government will strive to enhance the readiness and preparedness of the ROK-US alliance and deterrence capabilities to effectively defend the peninsula's peace and stability. I will also seek to materialize nuclear weapons sharing agreement with the United States as a peaceful means against the North's nuclear threats. On the gist of the inter-Korean relation problem, the alternating use of the notion of a nation and a state in a non-principled manner often brought much confusion in our dealings with the threats from North. It is true that the inter-Korean relation by character is a special one. However, it also entails a character of a normal state-to-state relationship. Therefore, the North's nuclear challenges, for instance, cannot be approached from a nationalist perspective. Such an approach will not lead us to anywhere. Our sober approach to the North as a state is more effective in inviting it to a candid dialogue. It will be more beneficial to the North too. We must avoid giving a delusion to the North. We must remind the North that a cliché approach that it once relied on does no longer work. What is more important is that we must lead the North to become a normal member of the international community. Should the North's denuclearization show progress and sanctions could be lifted, for example, I'd like to see the establishment of an international consortium include the two Koreas, the US, China, Japan, Russia, and EU to take place in building an industrial complex like Kaesong. This approach will guarantee sustainability and stability at a greater extent than the old one that was exclusive only to two Koreas. Lastly, I'd like to introduce my vision for science and technology diplomacy. Today's diplomacy has become more comprehensive in nature and character than ever. Diplomacy now literally stands for economy in today's world. The core to it is to secure a better technology through international cooperation and pioneering a new market. No country is an exception here. In particular, for a country like Korea that heavily relies on trade, economic diplomacy has ever become more important. Our economic diplomacy portfolio reads, an original source lies in the United States, the greatest market in China, and both competition and cooperation lies ahead in the global supply chain. In this complex world of economic diplomacy, we must secure our advantage from a stronger diplomatic cooperation on the science and technology front. Our core strategy to this end is to secure a super gap and divide in technologies against other competitors and consolidating our position as a core state in the global supply chain. I have already announced that I will become the Commander-in-Chief of Global Science and Technology Diplomacy in the age of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. I have also promised to transform Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs into Ministry of Diplomacy and Trade. In addition, I will establish a so-called National Science and Technology Commission under the President's office. It will be the control tower of overseeing diplomatic and security work in relations to advancing our interests in science and technology areas. Should I become the next president, I am committed to founding a support system to science and technology diplomacy by organically inducing cooperation from the public, private, and industrial sectors. Such a system will be put into real diplomatic work. I have laid out the vision and principles for my diplomacy, with a focus on relations with neighboring states and inter-Korea relations. It is my sincere wish that Korea will become a responsible to the world on the diplomatic and security front. Hope one day I will soon have a chance to share my vision on the global network diplomacy that I deem also critical to the realization of the aforementioned diplomacy. Thank you for your attention.